I don't know about you, but I, as an autistic person, have always hated cooking. I've just always seen it as such a waste of time. You know, we invest all of this time into making a meal for ourselves or our families, and it's gone within a matter of minutes if you're lucky. And I don't know, I've just always really struggled with this. So when I look back at my childhood, and in particular with my relationship with food, I was always a really picky eater as a child, and in fact, the only things that I really enjoyed eating were either crisps or pickled onions. And my family were Scottish, so we ate a lot of kind of meat and potato meals. And my family seemed to really love kind of processed meat products as well, such as lawn sausage and Scotch pies and Scotch eggs. And I've just always hated this kind of food. I just really struggled with it as a child. And I remember my mum having real difficulties in getting me to eat. And also, just as an aside, I remember my mum desperately trying to get me to eat liver, and quite regularly actually, because I had chronic nosebleeds as a child. So it really didn't help my relationship with food, because I just found it so disgusting. So I guess because of this, being confronted with food I didn't like regularly as a child, it meant that I had no curiosity in food really while I was growing up. And certainly when I was able to move out of home and live on my own, whether it be in bed sits or with flat shares or in flat shares, I just found the whole kind of cooking thing really difficult. And I just relied a whole lot on really unhealthy foods such as microwave meals and sandwiches and junk food really. And I can't count the amount of filet o fishes I've had in my life, because it was just my kind of go-to food whenever I was unsure what to eat really. And of course sandwiches aren't unhealthy when they're eaten as parts of a healthy diet, but I'd have days of being far too reliant on them and basically eating them for every meal. And because I was going out to work, often for 40 hours a week, I would just be so exhausted as a result of just working. You know, as autistic people, work can be incredibly stressful, and particularly when you don't know you're autistic. And I was really high masking in the workplace, so it just took up so much kind of mental and physical energy. And the last thing I'd want to think about when I got home was food and having to cook a meal. It's just so exhausting a concept when you're already feeling exhausted. So I would just reach for whatever was easiest, really. And I think actually in hindsight, one of the reasons I'd rely so much on junk food for certainly some of my adult life was whenever I'd live in a bedsit, I just would feel really uncomfortable with going to the kitchen, because I would never want to talk to people that I live with and be perceived. You know, the thought of somebody watching me cook a meal would just be horrifying. So yeah, I just rely a lot on junk food and just eat it in my room, because it was the simplest thing for me to do in terms of energy. I wouldn't have to engage with anybody else, or even just worrying about having to engage with other people. I'd just, you know, close the door and eat whatever was handy. So I guess things were a little better when I was able to live in a flat on my own, when I think when I reached 30. But I would never be adventurous with cooking at all, and I only actually do it very occasionally, and it would only be 2 or 3 meals that I could actually kind of cook from scratch, which, you know, some people would deem a bit embarrassing really, but for me it was my reality, because I just didn't have the wherewithal. I think the act of cooking essentially is an act of self-care, isn't it? But as very many autistic people will understand, that wasn't my version of self-care. Self-care was being aware of how exhausted I was, and to allow myself to develop shortcuts, such as microwave meals or junk food or sandwiches, because the idea of cooking a meal would just be too much. And also, I've always been dreadful at following instructions, so the thought of following a recipe would just be an anathema to me. I just couldn't imagine myself doing this at all, creating food in different stages according to somebody else's doctrine. It just wouldn't be something that I could do, or still can't do. And also, I think in terms of cooking, there's always a certain amount of responsibility, isn't there, or personal responsibility, in that if you make a mistake with food, you could potentially get really ill off the back of it. And I'm thinking perhaps undercooked meats or something like that, or food that isn't the freshest can, of course, cause real issues, and we can be really ill afterwards. And I've just never been able to trust myself in that way. I just don't like the idea that a meal could potentially not be 100% safe and could cause illness. And of course, because I've never learned how to cook, I don't fully trust myself. So I would never be able to cook something really imaginative, because, as I say, I'd worry that I was going to be ill, or if I was cooking for another person, I'd feel absolutely dreadful if my cooking made them ill. I have to say, though, that when I met my partner, Ian, because he really does quite like cooking, things got a little bit better in my mid-30s in terms of my diet, because he was able to quickly deduce what kind of foods I'd like, and thankfully we liked a lot of the same kind of foods. So yeah, things were a little easier then. And obviously, because Ian was cooking for two people as well, I think it allows you to perhaps be a little more adventurous, because I think certainly when you live alone, the thought of cooking an entire meal for yourself just seems just a bit ridiculous. Or certainly that's how I felt, because I just thought, this could take me an hour or two to make. It'll be gone in 10 minutes, and I could invest that time into something that I really want to do, such as, I don't know, making some art, or investing myself in another special interest, because there just isn't enough time in the day for special interests anyway. Certainly, I think, and I think many autistic people feel similarly about this. I think time really is precious, and particularly if you're working all day, or if you've got other responsibilities such as bringing up a family, time for special interests is really important. And I've just seen cooking as, yeah, just a waste of time. And it must be great, actually, if you're an autistic person and cooking is a special interest, because I think that would be, just the perfect meeting, really. But yeah, certainly for me, cooking has, I've felt, always been a bit of a waste of time, really. And that's before you even consider how much mess cooking can make and how long it can take to clear up afterwards. And also, there's the whole kind of sensory thing with food as well. Many autistic people struggle with ARFID, or certain foods and textures can be really difficult and at times overwhelming. And I can certainly relate to this, and I'll probably do a separate video specifically on ARFID and EDs at some points. But for me, another factor of cooking is that I find the smells really, really overwhelming. And there's something about whenever I have cooked a meal, because I've been so immersed in the smell for so long, by the time the meal is actually ready, when ready to eat, I'm just kind of over it already, because I felt like I've spent so much time with it that the last thing that I feel like doing is eating it once it's ready. It's really strange, actually. I'd love to know if you can relate to this. Also, going out for meals has always been a bit challenging for me as well. I've always been okay if it's been like a Chinese restaurant, because I know exactly what I'd order from a Chinese, and it's always been very, very similar. But I'm thinking in terms of kinds of like pubs, really. And it was Ian that made the observation, actually, that I'd always order Hunter's chicken whenever we'd go to a pub, and this was over the course of, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And I'd always complain that I didn't like it, but I'd always order it again. And I think it was because I ordered it once at a pub and it was completely fine. It felt for me like a safe food. I understood what it was, and it was mainly chicken and a little bit of cheese, I think. But whenever I'd go elsewhere, it was always a different version of this meal. So it would be that pub's version of the meal, and it would always be super fatty. It would have loads of bacon over it, and I just would never want to eat it. But I would never learn from this. Perhaps I just thought it was a safe food because of the first time that I'd had it, and I just thought it would be a safe variant of the original when it would come out, but it never was. So I kind of learned from that experience, but it was only because it was pointed out to me from another person, which is really interesting. So I think having a bad diet through the years and decades has certainly caused guts issues for myself. I've always struggled with IBS for as long as I can remember. And of course, we know that autistic people are more likely to have guts issues. And you can really understand the reasons why, because so many of us have food restrictions and difficulties with tastes and textures that many of us just don't eat a balanced diet. And for me, I think this ultimately led to my MCAS in my 40s, which is mast cell activation syndrome. Well, really, it was a perfect storm of guts issues and hormonal changes and perimenopause, because these both can act as triggers for MCAS, and certainly did in my case. So it means that I have like allergic style reactions or intolerances to most foods. So it means that because I have to reduce the amount of histamine I have in foods, that I'm now in a state where I have to basically cook every meal that I have from scratch, which sends me bonkers as somebody that hates cooking anyway. I've had to cook, up to 3 meals a day from scratch very often in my life, and I absolutely cannot stand it. It seems like such a waste of time, such a waste of effort. The food I eat anyway is pretty disgusting because I'm so limited. I can't eat what I want to. For instance, this morning I had a bowl of white rice and fried courgettes, which probably doesn't sound like the worst option, but when it's your kind of only option for breakfast, which it is at the moment, it's, yeah, pretty grim. And also, because of my condition, it means that Ian and I can't eat together anymore. Well, we do eat together, but we have to have separate meals because I'm pretty sure that Ian just would not want to eat what I have to eat these days. Although very occasionally we will eat the same meal, and I think it's really because Ian wants to show me a bit of solidarity, but it really does test my patience. So anyway, I would love to know if you can relate to anything I've talked about today, and if you too really struggle with cooking and see it as a waste of time, because oh gosh, I hate it so much. And it must actually be really difficult for those of you out there with children, actually, because you're kind of forced into a situation where you're having to provide food for other people as well. So it's not something that you can avoid as easily. So yeah, that must be really challenging. So yeah, let me know down below. So give it a like if you got this far. If you don't know what to say, leave me an orange heart down in comments. I would always be grateful, and I'll see you again soon.